Once you become CEO, you're no longer going to own your face. People are paying attention to every single facial gestures you make. The more you open yourself, the more human you become, the more inspiring you can become, and the closer you can become with people.
Carlos Abrams-Rivera, former CEO of Kraft Heinz, with such a great long experience in working in the consumer product group across Mondelēz, Campbell, and Kraft Heinz.
I'm at my best where things are very challenging. You have worked your whole life to have the opportunity to feel that level of pressure. Make sure that you surround yourself with people who are going to have the agility to be able to move with the volatility that's going to be happening globally.
When you first sat in that chair, what surprised you about the job that nobody had warned you about?
What surprised me is,
Hi everybody, welcome back to a new episode of the World Class Leader Show. Today I'm in a very good company. So I have with us Carlos Abrams-Rivera, former CEO of Kraft Heinz, born and raised in Puerto Rico, and with such a great long experience in working CPG, the consumer product group, across Mondelēz, Campbell, and Kraft Heinz. He will tell us more about his experience as a CEO, and that is what we are here today for. So, Carlos, thank you so much for being on the show with me today.
Andrea, it's a pleasure, and I'm very thankful to get spend time with you here.
Great. And look, I'm very excited, Carlos, because to me, you're a kind of a guest that I really would like to have in the show. So, because I mean, when we met the first time, you demonstrate a lot of openness, vulnerability, and that's what we'll be talking about it today. And also at the end, we'll talk more about the future, what you're up to. But we'd like to start, as always, from the past, because you grew up in Puerto Rico, you went back to work for the governor, and then you spent 30 years climbing through, major organizations, so Mondelēz in Mexico, as I said, Campbell, and eventually the CEO seat at Kraft Heinz. So, but when you first sat in that chair, what surprised you about the job that nobody had warned you about it?
Well, I guess let me start with the fact that I know people normally hear the fact that, CEOs are a lonely job, but I'll tell you what surprised me, which is that it happens overnight. Overnight, all of a sudden, people are going to interact with you differently. And you start feeling kind of a sense of, a sort of separation from everybody else. And sometimes are people that you had known for a long time. And yet, overnight is that sense that, things are different and that there's a certain distance there. I'll tell you on the other hand, too, something that one of my coaches, Marshall Goldsmith, actually prepared me for. And at the beginning, I thought he was kidding, which was, he said, Carlos, once you become CEO, you're no longer going to own your face. And I'm like, what do you mean I'm no longer going to own my face? But it's true. The moment you become CEO, people are paying attention to every single facial gestures you make. And you have to be aware of that so you can use that power for good. And because, again, it can actually matter quite a bit internally and externally. So there's a lot of things that you don't expect, but I think that's one a couple of things that jump to mind.
Yeah, and I'll come back to, really want to come back to the idea of loneliness, because it's a topic that is worth, discussing more. But before getting to that, I'd like to ask another question about the CEO seat, because something that you said, I think when we met the first time, that really stuck with me. Because sometimes, not sometimes, actually, all the time, I review the conversation I had with potential guests, and then I consider, okay, but what is really telling me? What is in the background? And you said something that really stuck with me. So you said, when things were going well, that's when you were probably at your weakest, because you thrive in the hard moments. So where does that come from? Tell me more about
Yeah, no, I'm glad you picked up on that. But let me take that answer from the other angle, which is when I will say that I'm at my best where things are very challenging. And I think part of the reason for that is, one, in those moments, it demands all of you. It means that you have to be strategic, you have to be operational, you have to be inspirational at that moment. And also during those moments in which you are so challenged, you're going to have to bring people with you. So when you kind of go through those crucibles, and the fact that you went with these people who were with you in that kind of moment, it creates kind of a sense of camaraderie. It creates a sense of I was on my best, and I'm going to be able to now go forward with people that I trusted and trusted me in order for us to overcome that challenge. So really, it comes from that sense of being able to feel like it is certain challenges that you require to put all the best of you to work. If that makes sense to
Yeah,
you.
it does. It does. And to me, is one of the with one of the most interesting part is the importance and the privilege of leading with pressure. You're experiencing pressure and you're leading through these
Exactly.
moments. And again, there are many different perspective of pressure as a privilege. There are some amazing basketball coaches. They build their own narrative about pressure
Yeah.
is a privilege, and I'm
Right.
sure that you probably we are thinking about the same person that said that.
Yeah.
But that is a good segue to the sport metaphor, because I know that you're a sport fan. You have used as well. You're still thinking about sport as a perfect metaphor for the working business. And again, now we move from basketball to tennis because, first of all, because we are both tennis fan, and I'm also a tennis player. I don't remember whether you're a tennis player. I forgot to ask you. Are you?
No, I love watching tennis, but I'm not a
Okay,
tennis player.
just watching. Okay,
Yeah.
great. But you compare the CRO to being a tennis player on the court. I remember as well. That's what you said. Thousands of people watching. To your point before, millions on TV, and it looks like you are alone. You're still alone dealing with that. But behind the scenes, you said, and we know most of the tennis players, but also now most of the professional athletes, they have a number of coaches working with
Yes.
them. I
Right.
think we mentioned about Sinner, 7 coaches, Alcaraz has a whole team. So a lot of people supporting leaders, right? Now, what does the CEO support system actually look like, and what happens when you don't have one? Because, you work with the coach
Right.
before, but do you feel like did you have the support system in place or leading through that level of pressure when you were at that level?
So let me let me answer that in 3 ways. First of all, let me go back to your point about the pressure is a privilege. Billie Jean King talked about that, a tennis player, and you go into the US Open tennis and you see that quote right there as players walk into the court. And in fact, I think this idea that you think of it as a privilege because you have worked your whole life to be able to have the opportunity to feel that level
Exactly.
of pressure, so I
Yes.
love that sense. So, and then going back to your point about coaching, listen, when you are a CEO, the whole world sees just you as a person, whether you're as externally analysts in Wall Street, the media, your employees. But the reality is that you need that support system. And I think people, I love people like Rafa, Coco Golf, who seem to also be enjoying the pressure and also understanding that they're not doing it alone. Um, and I think for me, one of the changes that I made is that while I've had business coaches in the past, I expanded my coaching network. So, you had the formal part of that, which is your business coach. You had a media coach. You had people who you could mentor you, and then I also expanded that with more informal kind of coaching. So peers that I admire, people who are outside of kind of the normal way of everyday work, that allow me to also be another kind of way for me to understand whether I was going the right way or not. So that idea of both formalizing your coaching, but also making sure that you also expand it in a way that allows you to kind of feel like you have the right support system. In fact, over the last 6 months, I also added a therapist to my coaching, kind of somewhat of my coaching staff.
Yes.
And frankly, I wish I had done that a couple of years ago as well too. So I think this idea of preparing yourself, in all these ways, in order for you to be at your best, and making sure that while people only see you, that you recognize that you're going to need a whole team for you to be at your best.
That's brilliant, and I'm with you. As I probably mentioned, I have created a CEO community, so where CEOs can support each other. Because again, coaches to me, no, let's put it another way. Not all the CEOs have the luxury or the opportunity to be surrounded by multiple coaches in multiple dimensions, right?
Sure.
You work for a global firm, so probably that is a little bit easier than other people. They don't have, unfortunately, the luxury. So I said, well, you can have a coach, but also you can have a set of other CEOs dealing with the same situation that you're dealing with. You can share it, you can learn it, you can get inspired. So that, hence, the fact that I created WCL21 as a community. But it's the same point, right? It's the same point
Agree.
about creating a
Agree.
support system that you need to operate at the level of pressure that you're operating with. But talking about coaches, you mentioned before. I mean, you have had Marshall Goldsmith as a coach, and he's one of the most famous coaches. And most of people know him, but I think it's worth saying that. And he gave you a red folder, right, full of feedback that
Yes.
was neither fun nor happy. That was probably
Yes.
difficult to take from as a CEO. Tell me about that moment. What was in that folder?
Yeah. Yeah. So the way that Marshall approaches, and Marshall works, at least with me, he worked with Mark Thompson, who's another, amazing coach. And so they work in partnership. And when we first started working together, now it's been almost 4 years, he interviewed, between Mark and Marshall, interviewed about 28 different people, the board, peers,
Yeah.
my wife, and they collect all this kind of feedback to kind of present to you. And they start the conversation with like, here's the blue folder that has, all the great things about you that makes you successful and so forth. And they give it to you the first day. And you read that and you're like, you know what? Maybe I don't need a coach. Maybe I'm doing okay. Yeah.
Everything seems to be working here.
Everything seems to be great. People love me. Then the next day they give you a red folder. And in the red folder, by the way, it's a little thicker than the blue one. All of a sudden, all the things that you need to work on. And it is very humbling because at this point of your life, you feel like you have achieved all the things. And yet there is a lot of work to do. And I think that for me, it really changed how I approach my leadership. It was something that even though I have been working in teams for decades, it actually added something new to my skill set. And frankly, a lot had to do with vulnerability. Because when, as you go up in our organization and you become CEO, sometimes you tend to feel like you have to be more protected, just and not as open in your persona every day. And I think one of the things that I worked on was actually to be more vulnerable in an open space, not just in small groups, but in large groups. And that takes some practice. And it was a journey. It took me probably a couple of years to really feel comfortable being as vulnerable as I have been in order to be able to improve on my leadership. But frankly, it has paid off. I mean, I will get feedback after town halls, after discussion with large teams about how they felt more connected to me because I was being more vulnerable. So something that is, I think it was for me a little bit of an aha that the more you open yourself, the more human you become, the more inspiring you can become, and the closer you can become with people. So I think it's been a journey, but started with a red folder, that wasn't as fun, but it really led me into a much better place afterwards.
Yeah, and there are two things, Carlos. So one to me is I do the same thing. So it's a very similar
Okay.
process. And I think why is important, particularly for people at the CEO level, but I would say at the C-suite level, generally speaking, is because unfortunately the quality of the feedback that you get inside of the system every single day is poor, or is absent, or is very poor. Right?
Great point.
It's poor, so you get a very diluted message. Sometimes it's wishy-washy, it's nice, but it's not really real, so you don't really can act on it. So the way out that Marshall and Mark, the structure, I think is great because it will allow you to see a different perspective you didn't see before. That's when things change, right?
I think that's a great point, Andrea, because we have at the company and many companies that I worked at, we have a 360 feedback process.
I'm sure.
So you feel like you have heard it all. You feel like people right there, it's anonymous, so you feel like they're giving you great feedback. But to be honest, it's exactly the process that you're going through, Andrea, which is like when you do it, when you can go deeper with the people who are providing the feedback, it creates a different level of honesty and frankly, feedback that you haven't received.
Yeah, and again, there is an element, unfortunately, that whoever is sitting in the CEO chair, unfortunately, receive even less than feedback than anybody else. That's, I think, is the flip side the negative flip side of being a CEO, because people are always afraid, unfortunately, no matter how human you are, to say frankly what they really think about the CEO.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, so that seems to actually work a lot. But I'd like to go back a second to the family part,
Mm.
because I don't actually interview wives, so it's interesting that they did. But it's also interesting because, and I think you said that powerfully. I mean, your family is not prepared for the pressure you carry as a CEO, and that is really consistent with my experience, personal, but also experience of other people I work with as CEOs. And you have worked your whole life in to earn the privilege that you were talking about it of being under pressure,
Right.
but they haven't.
Right.
Our partners, their partner, leaders partners, don't they, unless they were or they are the CEOs, but otherwise they were not prepared for that. How did you navigate it without getting very personal? I'm not interested to hear something very personal for you, but how can you navigate the family situation, because they didn't pay for that, right?
Right. No.
They pay for something different, which is love and being spending time together.
Well, and I think a couple of things to that. I'm glad you had that question because it's something that you also don't get to see from afar. When you join and take that job as CEO, is you're not doing it alone. Your whole family is coming with you, and
Eh,
and you're gonna be in the public eye if you're in a large company,
yes,
and they're gonna see the good things, but they're also gonna see the tough things, right? And they don't
yes,
have the coaching support that I do. So you also have to become a little bit of a coach in the family to make sure that you are open, that you're bringing them along in terms of what they can expect to hear and how to help them shield from all the noise that is happening out there. So you just rather than versus going to low detail, what I would say is be aware of it, make sure that that's something that you also need to be paying attention to, whether it's your wife, your kids, your family, that this is something that's going to affect them. One of the things that I did is I also wanted to make sure I involved them in the great things that were happening. So if you look at the last few years on the global town halls of the company that we had over
mm,
35,000 people, you will see many times my kids there and you will see my wife there. And it was the idea that those are great moments and fun moments. So at least they can get to see the joyful part of what I do as well, too. So it was a way for me to say, listen, I know there will be tough things and things you cannot control, but enjoy some of these moments as well too, because this is part of what it means to be part of this role.
oh, totally, totally. I think what I see, unfortunately, when these things they don't go well, is the partner becomes the collector of all the concern, frustration SEOs have, which is normal. But they essentially they bring in work at home, and that unfortunately has a real implication on the relationship, right?
Agreed.
So,
Agreed.
so, so
Yeah,
I
you
think
have to be when you're at home, be as much as present as possible. Make sure that you are investing quality time in those moments with the family, because I think it means a lot.
totally. Now, you made an observation that I haven't heard any other CEOs made. As a trust in government, in media, institution erodes, and we know that is unfortunately what we're dealing with. CEOs are becoming the last trusted voice in many communities.
Hmm.
So people are looking to the person running the company for opinions on things that 20 years ago would have had nothing to do with the CEO. What does that actually feel like from the inside? What does it mean?
Yeah, I think, first of all, I would say is that has dramatically changed over the years. I think more and more that has become part of this role of the CEO. And I think if you go back, Andrea, I mean, if you're a CEO, you got to that job because you have a great area of expertise, because you have demonstrated some capabilities and skills inside those organizations. So this aspect of being able to put yourself in the public forum, many times is a new thing for many CEOs. And the reality is that questions will come from diverse number of sources, whether that is wars, cultural situations that you're going to be asked about. And by the way, it's not just externally, it's not just the media or Wall Street.
Yes.
It could be your own employees who want to know, where do you stand on these cultural topics? And for me, there was the way I approached it, at least, was three things that I would do. First, let's make sure that I'm being clear on what the values of the companies are. Start with the values. Second, with your own reflection, or how do I make sure that I am exercising those values in a way that is consistent with my principles? I think that sense of you need to make sure that you cannot fake those things, that you are acting in a way that is consistent with your own personal values and your principles. And then third, be clear with the board when and if you're going to use a framework in which to put yourself in the public town square. So I think the more you understand, you and the board understand that, listen, these are the topics in which, and the situations in which we're going to make a comment, and places that we're not going to get involved. I think that helps CEO having that articulation prior to when the crisis happened. But again, starts with the sense of being clear on the values of the company that you represent, making sure you're consistent with your principles and values, and then having a framework in which to decide where it is important for you to comment and where it's not.
And how can you make that decision? It's not an easy decision to make. When it comes to for CEOs to step in or step away.
Yes,
I know it's I work with a lot of CEOs. It's not an easy decision, because sometimes you have the tendency, the orientation to say something about it because you don't like it, you don't think it's right, it's true, all of that. But then on reflection, you say, well, maybe it's better not saying anything. And I think it's one of the most challenging part for a CEO, especially for either global organizations or organizations that have such a strong roots in communities for a reason or another. They will be always subject to criticism, subject to to feedback, etc. So how did you find that balance? Did you have a kind of a formula? I mean, is the board really has been the best way for you to say step in or step out on case by case, or you had a different formula?
Well, there was the two things. First of all, I'll say you spoke about this community of CEOs, and I find those very helpful. So I had actually spoken as I joined the role, as I started the role, I spoke with a number of CEOs who have gone through difficult experience. I've gone to talk with a CEO of a large retailer who talked about the fact that, somebody had a gun and shot, and the gun went off in their store. And he decided that he wanted to take a point to say, we're no longer going to have guns in our stores. And that created a huge amount of issue for him personally and his family, by the way, that had to do security. But it was also the fact that it was consistent with his values and so forth. I talked to people CEOs who had to deal with situation in Ukraine and Russia and how they approached it. So part of me was understand what other people have done in situation of crisis for me to create a framework. And then frankly, you spoke about the board. I do find that the board is very helpful because they can give you a sense of, here's the thing that they have seen have worked, but it doesn't work. The one thing that is important to clarify from something you said, Andrea, is that it's less about what you think. It's also about remember that you're representing the company.
Yes.
You may feel personally something, but you also have to start with not just, the values of the company. That was my first kind of filter as I think about what I wanted to talk about. And then obviously it has to be consistent with something that that you feel that is consistent with your principles, but it starts with the values of the companies as well too. And I think that helps you create a sense for what it makes more sense, and you're not going to comment on everything, but there are things that you are going to have to comment. And frankly, there is not a black and white. There is not a, perfect scenario. So that's why it takes quite a bit of conversations, sometimes with the board, sometimes your own reflection to figure out what is the right thing for you to do at this moment.
Yeah, makes totally sense. Let's shift a little bit gear. So one of the topics that every CEO is very concerned about right now, clearly, is AI. And everybody in the audience right now is dealing with that. I mean, we were actually having a conversation, a round table in our community. And one CEO, again, not surprising, he said, guys, can you really help me to understand how you use AI in my organization? It looks like a very simple question, but because there are so many different insights and perspectives about AI, and I had on the show so many amazing people, they are really building AIs right now in their own organizations. And everybody has a different approach. I mean, Charlie Lee, Josh Bersin, so people that have a view in terms of how AI should be used. But if I
Yeah.
think about you when you were, for example, at Kraft Heinz, how did AI actually change the decision you were making as a CEO? Let's imagine that you had AI available at the time. Again, not as a technology level, but more, I'm interested more at the leadership level. What kind of decision you could have done with AI, or AI could have support you more into that?
Yeah. I mean, let me tell you, I guess, first of all, what we did, which is, if you think about the last few years, and there is the AI and there's also the Gen AI. And frankly, we've been experimenting with AI for many years now. And we were starting already to use AI before the world knew what a chat GPT was. So that
Yes.
idea of you need to make sure that there was a lot of pilots, but my recommendation to people is, I think stop with the pilots. You need to start now making sure you're making real commitments to AI in order for you to be able to see what the
Yeah.
benefits are. And what I would tell you is the way kind of I approach it was, let's make sure that we have the right level of investments that allows you to have the level of return on those investments, and that you can track the benefit in your P&L. So the way we started our journey was in places that it was easier to track the value creation, manufacturing, logistics, sales with trade, procurement. Those were areas that we invested in AI. We developed sometimes our own AI. Sometimes we actually partner with other people, Microsoft and other companies, in order for us to then put those into practice. But then we also move it to marketing. We move it to HR. But every time it has to be a situation in which we can prove that the ROI existed and that we can track those returns. The one other aspect is, as people are thinking through AI, how to use it in your company, to the question you got in your community, is that there's also a cultural change that comes with that investment.
Yeah.
At Kraft Heinz, we basically lean into the sense of ownership that we have as a culture, as a way to make sure that we put AI as a way to get more value from each employee. So if you're an owner, you can find a way to get more out of everybody, be able to every employee to give better value. That's a win situation. And that is true not only at the headquarters, but also at the operator level who's working on the line. We did this thing called the connected worker. And it was for us to be able to provide AI in our lines, in operation lines, in order and let the operators see what was happening ahead of time. What it led to was us being able to do preventative maintenance in a way that saved the company money. And the operators see it as a benefit. They don't see it as a threat to them. It was something that actually was making their job better, because now they're doing more value-added job. They're actually anticipating when things may break versus having to repair all the single time. That's an example of us making sure that people lean into the culture of ownership and see how that can create value for them.
No, sorry, I have a question about that, Carlos.
Please.
Specifically on the culture, because that is such an important point. Now, culture for 100 or 200 employees organization is something. Culture inside of 36,000 employees organization is a completely different animal. Now, you're probably already answering to the question, but how can you really embed AI in 36,000 people organization, where most of people were or still are afraid in terms of what AI will have as an impact to their life, to their work, etc. So now I think it's more about what is important, what is the return investment for them to use AI. But do you have any other lessons in terms of how can you really mobilize an entire large organization in using AI?
Yeah. I mean, for us, it was the idea of, go slow in order to go far. And that idea of us making sure that when we did a pilot, we can track the benefit, and then we make sure we communicate that benefit across the company. So if you were going to be able to say, listen, now let me give you another example. We have started ingesting data from our customers in a way that allowed them to save money, and for us to save money on how we actually deploy our logistics products to their stores. then we actually make sure that everybody knew about that example. So they don't see AI as a threat, but in fact, a way to make their job easier. So that sense of making sure that you can see the benefit, that you can prove the benefit, and that you can advertise internally the benefit was a way for us to do it. When we did it in HR with the same thing, people may think, okay, that leads to job losses. No, it leads to people actually doing much more um, complex and better type of jobs. So it actually was a way for them to learn new things, to feel energized about using AI in their daily work versus seeing it as something that was going to take away jobs and so forth. So I think it's about how you're making sure that you make the proof of concept, and I make sure the employees understand that that is true. And frankly, you talk about cultural change. That cultural change also extends to the board. So I've only spoken about the employees. You also have to make sure the board is coming along with you in this investment, because there is capital allocations that has an implication in terms of how much you're going to be investing in AI. And they want to see, what you're doing and what are you doing and what's the result of what you're doing. And for me, what it helped was I did two things. One, did some sessions with the board, focus on the education, the board on AI, to make sure that we're coming along and listen, this is what's happening right now. This is what we at our company are doing, and this is what's coming next. So that sense that, for many members of boards who may not have been, where they will be working operational roles, AI may not have been part of it, that we can also make sure we bring them along with that. So that was one aspect I think that also helped us in terms of the cultural change that had to happen even at the board level as you are deploying AI through your company.
Yeah, it's totally valid. It makes totally sense to me. I mean, the board, to me, in my experience at least, unless maybe it's a private equity, but even there we can challenge the concept. To me, the board, one of the major roles of the board is embracing and shifting a new culture and organization. That's starting with the board, the way how you invest in money, the way how you're getting performance versus processes. There is a lot of things that the board can really be the driver for. So I love that you raise it. Now, if you put yourself now in many shoes of these CEOs, Carlos, they are there, out there, maybe not necessarily from the large or Fortune, 500 organization, but a little bit smaller. They know AI, they understand that it will provide most likely efficiency in their operations, in the process. But to be practical, now that you've been through this experience with AI, and now what they can potentially do in the next 90 days, what is one or two things that you would like to invite them to consider, especially if they're stuck at the moment, they don't know what to do about it. Now, you mentioned about the pilot, but how to find the right pilot? What is the right pilot to try? How is it connected to priority? So what could be something that can easy digestible for them to do in the first 90 days?
Yeah, great point. Listen, I think, first of all, as you said, I was fortunate enough that if I wanted to learn more about AI, me personally, which would be the thing that I would ask everybody to do, is, I had resources. I can go to Microsoft and I can sit with their, top engineers to go through what could it do and
Yes.
things that so it was helpful for me to go through my own journey of what exactly was AI. How do you actually
For your own
understand it better?
education, right?
For my own education, exactly. So if nothing else, if you're out there struggling, how may be the right way? I would say start with yourself. Start thinking about, how do you actually can now go and learn more about it. But you don't have to necessarily only go to Microsoft. Today, there's a number of boutiques, agent, companies who are actually helping companies deploy specific tools into AI. And I think that opportunity for you to go in and start thinking about, this is what it's about. Let me understand it. Let me see the proven business cases. I would say is, there's a lot of promises about AI. I would say start small. Start with those things that have been proven that can create value in the company, because that will create the momentum for you to start building into other aspects of the company. But, the first time I met with the CEO of IBM, I asked him about where the places that he had been using AI. And he said, there's certain parts on the financial aspects of the company, HR aspect of the company that were helpful for him to start in those areas. Obviously, he has progressed since we spoke. But that idea of start with places that you can get good value, and obviously go yourself in the journey of what AI can mean.
Great. Thank you. great suggestion. So let's move to the future, Carlos. So you stepped down from Kraft Heinz in January, and it's interesting that you call this moment as a gift. So what do you mean by that? Why is a gift?
Yeah, no, and you're right. It is a gift. You know, I've been working since I was 8 years old. And when you're a CEO, you're working 24/7. That's the job.
Yes.
If they don't tell you that, just just know that
Be
it's the
prepared
job.
for it. Yes.
Be
Yes.
prepared for it. So, for me, it gave me a moment to really think about, and take some time to reflection. And, I'll tell you, the first reflection was around what are the things that I learned? What were the lessons from my last role that I can apply in the next one? What were the things that I enjoy and that I didn't enjoy that could help me make sure that I'm thinking about where would I be thriving in the future? There was an aspect. I have a friend who wrote a few books, Hubert Joly, former CEO of Best Buy. He talks about the purpose, making sure you find your purpose. And I think part of that reflection too was that is the time for you to come back and meditate on what exactly are those things that truly motivate you. What is your purpose right now? And how would you adapt that into your future goals too? And for me, it's also the first time that I had a chance to just talk to peers in other industries that I had nothing to do with. So over the last, I would say, 10 weeks, I have spoken with people, whether they're in pharma, whether they're in restaurants, whether they're in appliances, to understand and, their own journeys. And frankly, I have been lucky enough that every time I reach out to somebody, they always want to talk. So it's been quite the gift to just get to see people in a different way, to find my own purpose in life, and to be able to think about what is it that I want to do next. So it's actually been quite energizing at this point.
So it's amazing because, and then I have another question for you on that. But in this moment of reflection, because you're stepping back, you're not running like crazy, in this 24/7 kind of a
Right.
job. So from one end, it's a little bit of complaining, but I understand why, right? Because at least it's a moment, okay, it's a gift, I can reflect. But I also know that you would like to go back in that sort of, very crazy environment sometimes that you were dealing with. What is the motivation for you? Is the pressure that
Yeah.
we discussed earlier? It's your own identity. I mean, that's the kind of people that is the kind of leader that you are, and you perform your best when you are into the things. So, what is really driving you?
Yeah. I mean, thank you for the question. I think that, first it's the idea that being thoughtful about where do I thrive. And I think it does go back to that first question you asked about,
Well,
I do enjoy kind of the challenges and being able to give back. And then I link that to my purpose of how do I make sure that, I continue to create opportunities for other people? How do I make sure that, I can open doors that can help people succeed? And I think a position on an operational role is both allows me to be at my best and allows me to continue to that sense of purpose. Plus, the reality is I don't like playing golf, so I'd rather be in the operational side of things, for the time being.
yeah, well, it seems to be part of your identity. Is there anything that you learn in this moment of reflection about your past experience, CEO, that potentially will be driving you to do something different? In a moment of this, we always think about what worked, what didn't work, what could have done differently. I mean, if there's nothing there, something is, I would say, wrong, right? Because
Right,
there is
100%.
always opportunity to improve, to make something different. As a reflection, we don't need to go into detail, but this is something that shows up to you as from a leadership standpoint. Said next time I want to work more on X or Y or Z.
Yeah, I think that first of all, there have been a number of things, and I think that for me, first of all, what's important is doing the reflection. Doing it's actually quite a bit of hard work. I know I'm speaking about it quickly, and you do the reflection. No, it's actually some deep soul searching to think about what were the lessons learned, how you apply it differently, and I think maybe what is different. I think for me at this point is that for if I think about the last 6 years of my career since I joined Kraft Heinz, I think there was couple of years of COVID. There was a couple of years of high inflation that happened in mostly, around the world, but very pronounced in the US.
Yes.
And everybody kept thinking, okay, 2025, things will go back to normal in some way. And the economists were predicting things that way. And then 2026, now things are going to go and be more normal. And the reality is that there's no normal. That if you are thinking that there's going to be a moment here in the next 5 years that everything's going to go back to some kind of level of normality, please do not. So one of the big lessons is you have to be now working in an environment in which volatility will be the name of the game. So what are the kind of people that you want to surround yourself that have the kind of strategic agility in terms of their mindset? They'll be able to kind of navigate the situations as you go forward. So you cannot just think about the team as I'm going to pick a team of experts on different fields. I have to also be working with people who are going to have the agility to be able to move with the volatility that's going to be happening here, and not just the United States, but globally. So I think that for me is going to be something very different that I do as I go forward too.
And do you think there is a way for leaders to be prepared on that or not? Because I had a conversation with another CEO, a good friend of mine, Alain Bejani. He's the former CEO of Majid Al Futtaim, one of the major retail store brands in Dubai. And he wrote a new book about new realities. And we actually talked about this. They were saying, I asked the same question. I mean, he said the same thing that you are saying. So be prepared for the volatile environment where you're dealing with, the ambiguity, with all the changes that are happening every single day, all the forces. Can you be prepared of this, or is it only part of your attitude or mindset?
Well, a big part is the growth mindset, right? You have to have that. And I think there are people who are more comfortable with that. I think there was a podcast in which one of your guests talked about the fact that people normally don't like change, but you have to kind of frame that volatility in a positive way, in a way that people see that this is part of a growth. If you have gotten married, if you have kids, it's a huge amount of change and stress, and yet it's a very positive aspect of change and stress. So how do you make sure that as people going through this volatility, that you help them prepare to see this as something positive and a growth opportunity? So I think it's also on the leader to make sure you're preparing your team mentally and for this change. But I think a part of it, as I started, the growth mindset, some people have it, some people don't. And I think I would say is make sure that you surround yourself people who have that growth mindset as you're going forward.
Yeah, that's to me is such a valid point. Last question for you, Carlos. If you go back to the young man that was working for the governor in Puerto Rico, so many years ago, and tell him one thing about what's ahead, what's coming, what would you say? Is about AI? So you would say something like, be prepared for how the technology will take the world. It would be about volatility, or what would you say at that young guy?
Yeah, I would say be curious. Because the reality is that you don't know what to expect. And I think, we talked about the growth mindset, but I think underneath that is a sense of curiosity for what's to come. And I think that can help you move forward. And I think the other piece is it's great for you to have the growth mindset. It's great for you to be curious, but also be humble enough to understand that you're not going to be able to achieve anything by yourself.
Yes.
Many times I see young people coming out of college or grad school, and they have succeeded because of their own achievements. They have done great in school and they have gotten great grades and they have done these things. And now they're going to come into the corporate world and realize that all those things are great for the individual grades, but they're not going to be great for them to succeed in a corporate world. They need to understand that you have to be able to bring people along. You're able to connect people along to make sure that you're inspiring and connecting in a human level people around you. So with both, be curious, have that growth mindset, but stay humble to make sure that, you can go far in this journey.
That's such a great way to end this episode, this conversation. It's such a great message. Carlos, thank you so much for being on the show with us today. I mean, we discussed about what does it mean leading as a CEO. We talked about leadership. real level openness and transparency sometimes CEOs don't really share. So I'd like to thank you on behalf of the audience for having shared that.
It's my pleasure, and happy to continue the conversation outside of the camera. Thank you, Andrea.